Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Leader to Leader podcast, the show where we bring together executives, authors, consultants, and leadership experts to share ideas, lessons learned, best practices to help us all become better at leading ourselves, our teams, and our organizations. I'm your host, Tom Athenauer, and this episode is brought to you by the StarQuest Group. Many of you know that I'm very particular if I invite back a guest that I've had previously in the show. And today I'm excited to reintroduce you to Dr. Gordy Curphy, who is an organizational psychologist, an author, a consultant who has worked with thousands of teams and has researched more than 5,000 global teams to try to discern what really differentiates those best performing teams out there. He has conducted different research with T1 and T2 studies on teams and to help them identify what are those positive those levers that correlate to positive results. He's also worked with over 600 senior teams around the world to help those teams become better at pulling together and accomplishing greater performance. I had Gordy as a guest back in January of 2025, where we talked about some of the foundational aspects of building a high-performing team, and he walked us through his rocket model, and it was a really interesting discussion around what are the things that we as team leaders need to focus in on. During this episode, we dive into a new project that he's been working on to help team leaders actually increase their team effectiveness out there in the field. And so he's working on this, trying to pull together what are those things that really make the biggest difference that I, as a line manager, a team leader, can implement. With the proliferation of teams within matrixed organizations only growing and increasing, we've got to get better at dealing with being smarter about teams and dealing with some of these organizational dynamics, because the reliance on teams is only going to grow. For those of you that didn't listen in on that episode back in January of 2025, a bit about Gordy. He has held leadership roles in the U.S. Air Force, taught at the Air Force Academy, been part of the Blandon Foundation and Personnel Decisions International. He's also worked with startups and turnarounds and had global assignments that are focused on major organizational transformations. He's the author of 25 books, including the best-selling textbook, Leadership, Enhancing the Lessons of Experience, now in its 11th edition, with over 100,000 copies sold. He also is the mind behind the rocket model, that team framework that he talked about in our last episode. And so Gordy today is going to introduce some of his new work that he's been working on. He sent me over an early manuscript of a new book that he's been writing. And today we're going to be unpacking some of those new discoveries, all in service to helping us be better leaders as we lead teams and organizations. So let's jump into our conversation. Gordy Curphy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Gosh, we did an episode back in January of 2025 when you really walked through some of the structural aspects of building high-performing teams. And it was such an interesting discussion. And actually, we had a lot of feedback, very positive. So teams in people's response to that episode. And so I'm excited to have you back because you're working on something new now. You've got a new project that you're working on. So bring us up to speed on that.
Yeah, a couple of things. One is over the last 6 months or so, we came to the realization that we had collected data from about 5,000 teams from around the globe, where we had surveyed teams using our team assessment survey. And we were sitting on that data, and so what we ended up doing was revamping our survey, saying, okay, look, we collected data from all these teams. What did we learn from all of this? And let's update what we do in terms of how we provide feedback to teams.
Okay, so that's your team assessment survey that our listeners can actually access to, and we'll find out how they will provide how they can access that assessment. Correct at the end.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Super.
Yeah. And so and the idea behind the survey, when all is said and done, Tom, is to help teams have the right conversations. So we put a lot of care and feeding into the psychometric construction of the test to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to be doing with all the data we had collected. But in reality, what it's really designed to do is help teams understand how they're operating, how they compare to other teams, what they're doing well, what they're not doing so well, what customers or internal stakeholders are thinking about their performance, and to help them basically have the conversations that many teams have been avoiding. And so we made the report very self-explanatory, easy to understand, and it really helped teams move forward in terms of their journey to becoming a high-performing team.
Yeah. So there's a lot of resources out there, and there's assessments on team effectiveness and whatnot. What do you see as in that data? Because you've got 5,000 teams in your norm groups or your database. What are some common elements that you're seeing on those teams that sort of get stuck in that good level and not into that great level? Are there some things that are showing up that are consistent across what you're seeing relative to performance and results?
Yeah. So one of the I think a big thing to understand is if you really want to, well, first of all, not all teams need to be high performing. I will be the first one to say that. There are lots of teams that are average performers, and you know what? That's good enough. Sometimes the juice isn't worth the squeeze in terms of, it's going to take so much work to get this team to be high performing. Is it really worth the energy and effort to go there? You know what? They're doing good enough. And that may be all we can expect for a lot of teams, which is fine. But I'd also say that most teams could improve. Most teams could be better. They don't have to necessarily be in the high performing category, but they could be more efficient and more effective.
Sure.
And so one of the things I think that's real important to realize is we spent all this time and energy building this new team assessment survey, but that's only going to get you part of the way there. It's a little bit like getting on a scale. I may realize that I've got to lose 30 pounds. Getting on the scale will tell me that. that that's not going to help me lose 30 pounds.
Yeah. Good
And that's
analogy.
kind of what
Yeah.
the team assessment survey says. It's like, guess what? You've got a bunch of work to do on topic X, Y, and Z. If you don't do the work, it's not going to change. The scores are not going to change. The team's not going to improve. All the team assessment survey does is says, okay, look, you got a lot of work to do. Here's the areas where you need to do the work. And then you have to start helping teams do real work better by incorporating different activities to address those areas of improvement. Okay, so we don't have a clear understanding of the situation. How do we have these conversations to get everybody on the same page about here's what we're thinking about stakeholders, here's what we're thinking about our key challenges. I was on the video call this morning with a team in Israel. I'm going to be working with next week. Um, they have a bunch of problems around what the purpose of the team is and how it defines winning. And so we'll spend some time actually doing that and being clear about this is why this team exists, this is what its purpose is, here's its unique value add, and here's the way it wins. And so on and so forth. So the important thing to understand, I think, here is that the team assessment survey will only tell you what you need to work on. There's a bunch of things that have to happen after that to really help teams see improvement. And we've done some really interesting time one, time two research with a big pharmaceutical and med tech company
Uh huh.
where they've looked at the team assessment survey initially,
Uh huh.
looked at it 12 months later, and then also looked at the activities the teams did in between time one and time two surveys to see who changed and who changed the most.
And what the
And
results or what the impact was with some of those changes that
yeah,
were implemented, I
yeah,
presume.
and so on a 100-point scale, some of these teams were seeing 50 and 60-point improvements. They
Okay.
might have had an initial time one results like in the 20th or 25th percentile, and in the time two results like in the 65th, 70th percentile. But they had understood what it is they needed to do. They took action to address their shortcomings, and they stuck to it. So many teams end up. Oh yeah, all these teams I work. Well, many teams I work with end up. Do you ever go to? Do you ever see the movie Men in Black?
Uh huh.
You
Yes.
watch the
Yeah.
movie. You watch the movie Men in Black. Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith will put on their sunglasses and pull up the neuralizer, hit the button, and everybody forgets what ends up happening.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
terms of yeah, and teams have the same thing. Teams have neuralizers. They go to this offsite and they're like, I'm all fired up, ready to go. And 2 weeks later, they can't remember a damn thing they did. So one of the things that's really important is that, not only work on the right stuff, but you build team action plans so people can keep the momentum going, stick to their agreements, stick to their commitments,
So,
and regularly return to these.
so you've revamped this team assessment. You've also got another project, this book that you're working on. Kind of
Yeah.
bring us up to speed on that, because that's really what I was interested in relative to reconnecting with you, because you've been working on this project now for a while, and you've got some really interesting aspects to this book that are a little bit different, including some observations that you've noted in the teams that you've worked with your entire career with these
Yeah.
teams all over the
Yeah.
world.
Yeah. So one of the things that we did was we built this team assessment survey because you wanted to give teams feedback about how they're doing. And then we built a book called Ignition, a guide to building high performing teams, which is really intended for team facilitators. So, internal and external consultants that work closely with teams to help teams improve. We wanted to give a resource guide to these folks to help teams do real work better. But the Ignition book is frankly a lot more sophisticated and complicated for most line managers. They don't need to have that level of knowledge to help build high performing teams. So what we did instead was we're writing another book right now that's much more focused on line and staff managers and says, okay, here's what you really need to learn, or here's what you really need to know if you want to build high performing teams. We're not going to go into all these different tools and exercises and activities, but here's 10 questions you need to answer if you want to build a high performing team. And here's some tools you can use to help answer those questions with your team.
So it sounds like you've really, the target audience for this is people out there leading teams, and everybody's busy right now, and I've got to have the most critical elements that I need to zero in on to implement and really support and integrate into my team. It's almost like it's like a very targeted, how do I affect my team's performance and be very practical oriented. That's what I'm hearing, as opposed to with Ignition was targeting towards consultants and team facilitators. You're getting right to the people that are actually out there doing it.
Yeah, and trying to get to the nub of the issue, because the weird thing is when you look at leadership development programs, and you and I have been involved with leadership development for a long, long time.
Yeah, yeah,
A lot of them, and they're really, really good leadership development programs out there, but they tend to, cover two different categories. So one is there's usually most leadership development programs have a big self-awareness component. We're not going to help you figure out who you are, what makes you tick, how other people see you. It's going to be personality based or social styles or types or traits or, 360s or something like that. Help people understand what makes them tick, who they are. That's the self-awareness component. The second component usually focuses on building a leader's one-on-one leadership skills. What I mean by that is, especially if it's early leadership development programs, you're going to be focused on communication skills, influencing skills, feedback skills, goal setting skills, coaching, conflict management. A lot of that involves one-on-one interactions with a direct report. You know, we don't give a lot of training, or corporations typically don't give a lot of training. It says, you know what, you got 12 people working for you. How do you get those 12 people working effectively together to get something done?
yes, yeah,
Um, uh, and so, what we want to do is sort of start addressing that, start scratching that itch. So you've
yeah,
got 12 people working. How do you get these 12 working effectively together? What do you
yeah.
need to focus on? Where do you get started? What do you do first, second, third, fourth? Um, and how do you diagnose what's going on so you know how to intervene at the right place?
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. I mean, you're absolutely right. A lot of development focused on the one-on-one after you've got a good foundation of what you're good at, your strengths and blind spots and whatnot. Um, but the team's part of that is that next iteration. Do you think that the reason why there's not as much attention given to the team performance levels is because that teams are, for the most part, it's the Jim Collins good to great. The enemy of great is good. They're getting their stuff done. I'm working with several teams now, and they are performing, but the question just keeps raising: could there be some more uh, potential and better performance if they did come together more as a collective? And I think that's what's getting in the way of really kind of taking it up to that next notch on the performance scale.
I think that's right. The other thing I say is teams are the redheaded stepchildren of organizations. You go to an organization. Who's in charge of talent acquisition? Yep, there's somebody in charge of that. Who's in charge of learning and development? Somebody in charge there. Who's in charge of compensation? Yep, somebody over there. Who's in charge of succession planning? Somebody over here. Who's in charge of teams? I don't know. There's nobody typically designated that
Yeah.
says, okay, here's what we do around team effectiveness.
Yeah.
And organizations, even small companies, are going to have tens of teams. Multinationals will have tens of thousands of teams.
Yes. Yeah.
And teams are the vehicle by which work gets done. And
Yeah.
I think we have this mistaken assumption that, hey, people have been on teams all their lives. They know how to operate teams. They know how to build teams. They know how to manage teams. And my feedback is, yeah, they've been on a lot of teams. Most of them were not very good. And so there's the lessons they're learning is how to promote mediocrity. And most of them get no feedback about, well, how well are they actually doing and how do they stack up compared to other comparable teams?
Yeah. Yeah. And as your point about the proliferation of teams within organizations, our clients, some of these guys are, on 4 or 5 teams, and they're
Yeah,
managing, they're moving from one to the other. And to be able to get to that level that you're talking about, it requires a lot of investment of
yes,
time, energy, and resources to really take it to that level. So they can't, they got to take a look at which one is their first team or which one is the most
yeah,
critical relative to what you're trying to accomplish,
yeah,
and then zero in on that, you know?
yep. That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah. So I think organizations take effective teamwork for granted, and I don't think they should do that. I think most teams could stand to benefit quite a bit from improvement, and it doesn't have to be very expensive, and it doesn't have to be that difficult. But you know, until you get some feedback and until you learn some tools, we're going to just keep going with we're all going to keep doing what we've always done.
Yeah, most definitely. So we got some interesting data as we looked at this the last 12 months on these episodes, and some of the data that we got on our listeners is that we have about 30 some percent are in that what I would consider to be a team leader. So they're leaders who are leading individual contributors, and then
Hmm.
there's another 30 to 40% of leaders who are leading other managers, more of a
Hmm.
kind of, and then you got sort of some mixes up on top of that on the executive and senior levels. If I'm a team leader and I have a group of individual contributors, you have some observations that were part of the sort of the early manuscript that you sent over on this book.
Hmm.
You had some observations. If What words of advice would you have to somebody to say, "Hey, I've got all these things going on. I'm just trying to deliver on what we got to deliver, and I got this team. Give me a couple of ideas that I might be able to zero in on that might help my team come together to be more collectively effective."
Well, I think having adopting a common roadmap about how to build a team. So,
Okay.
so I think the problem is I'll go to a group of 20 leaders and I'll say, describe the characteristics of a high performing team. They'll come up with a list of characteristics, and I'll say, the worst team you were ever on. Describe the characteristics for that. And I've done this exercise all around the globe. The lists are the same. Everybody knows what good looks like. Everybody knows what bad looks like. It doesn't matter if you're in, uh, Belgium or Australia or
Yeah.
Indonesia or, it's same list. And I go, okay, great. We all agree. Then I'll say, okay, you look at these, characteristics of a high performing team, trust, respect, fun, energizing, results. How do you make that happen? And I tell you what, you have a room of 20 people, you're going to have 20 different answers.
Yeah. I agree.
There's no consensus about how to do that. And so I think one of the first things organizations or a leader needs to do is say, what is my mental model? What is my roadmap for building a high performing team?
Okay.
And sharing that with the rest of the team, so we all know, hey, if we're going to try to build a high performing team, this is what we have to work on. This is what we have to take into account.
Yeah.
Where do we
Yeah.
fall on this roadmap? Where are we in agreement that, yeah, that's this part's going well, this part of the roadmap's not going so well?
So really adopt and get people to buy into, hey, this is the structure. This is our methodology that we're going to. It may not be perfect, but it is something that we need to rally around, and then we're going to methodically build on some of these sort of levers or building blocks to up our game. That's what I'm hearing from you. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the story was, 8 years ago, the CEO of Red Bull was frustrated because he saw a real lack of teamwork across the organization. And he said, this is just not working real well. And he went to Stefan Salzer, the CHRO, and said, fix it. You need to fix it. You need to promote teamwork across the organization.
Uh huh.
And so they ended up doing a bunch of due diligence, and they ended up going with us to help them adopt a framework for building high performing teams.
Okay.
And so they have now trained about 3,000 people managers on how to build high performing teams.
Uh huh.
And the people managers all got feedback about how their teams were doing. They all got trained on the rocket model. And if you talk about teamwork to anybody at Red Bull, the first thing they'll start talking about is the rocket model. They all know the model. It's all clear. When teams get assembled, first get together, they know what to do in terms of, okay, here's what we got to work on first. Here's what we got to address second. Here's what we have to do third. Here's what we have to check to make sure everything's moving in the right direction. So it's just become ubiquitous across the organization. Other companies are starting to do that now too. And it doesn't have to be our model or our materials. It can be other companies' stuff. But the notion here is we do have a commonly understood roadmap about how to
Yes.
build teams.
Yeah.
We have some sort of an assessment that lets us know how we're doing against that roadmap, and we've got a bunch of tools that to help leaders improve teamwork.
Yes. Yes. Then they've got something to hold each other accountable to, and to be able to measure success on the effectiveness of some of those levers that they want to zero in on. I think with some of the teams that we've worked with, they've become so focused on the results and the outcomes, and yet what we're talking about in this case is we got to go upstream and really create some metrics and some goals specifically related to some of those things we need to build and put into place that are correlated to actually accomplishing better results. Otherwise, people are
Yeah,
not going to have the attention span to invest the time and energy and resources for that, right? So it's kind of like you have to almost like it's a long-term play. It's a delayed uh, sort of outcome because you're focusing on the things upstream. That's what
yeah,
we're talking about. You have to
yeah.
believe that they're going to work.
Yeah,
So
yeah. The other thing I'll say about that, though, too, Tom, so you're exactly right. But the other thing I'd say about that is it's always good, I think, to get feedback, benchmarking feedback about team dynamics and performance, and to get stakeholder feedback about team outputs. And this is where I think the team assessment survey can be so helpful because most leaders think they lead high performing teams. They think they're pretty good at it. And until you get that feedback about, okay, yes, yeah, maybe you are good. That's what the feedback will tell. Or guess what? Compared to other teams, yeah, you're really not as good as you think you are.
okay,
Or
yeah,
here's what your stakeholders are saying about your team's performance.
yeah,
The other thing I'll say is I'm always amazed at people's capacity to be infinitely interested in themselves. So if I've got if I've got some sort of feedback about the team and how it's operating and how it's ticking and how it stacks up against other teams, believe me, I'm going to get their attention. They're going to want, okay, how do we compare to everybody else? What are
yeah,
customers saying about us?
yeah,
So,
yeah,
and until you have that feedback, again, people think everything's fine. hey, we're getting the results.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about the team. We're getting our results. Okay, yeah, you're getting the results, but let's talk about how this team is actually functioning, how it compares to other C-suite teams, how it compares to other, say, sales leadership teams.
Yep.
Yeah, you guys are getting good results, but compared to other sales leadership teams, you're really not hitting on all cylinders.
Yeah.
Again, you're winning, but you're winning really ugly. So, that's what's different.
Yeah. Or you're winning without the ability to scale it, or with the
Yep,
the the sustainability. I know that you
yep,
talked in this early manuscript about building that sustainable, profitable growth aspect of
yep.
what you're trying to accomplish organizationally. Yeah. Yeah. What is I'm curious around the team leaders who are leading either other managers or different sort of cross functional groups, um, to be able to execute well. I mean, what are some of those aspects that you think are most important? Or maybe we can jump on some of these 10 observations that you identified that are creating a bit of the framework for this book that you're working on, and zero in on a couple of those,
Yeah.
that might be helpful, because our listeners typically will give us feedback. They go, hey, can you give us some specific things that we could take back and put into play with the work that we're doing as we're trying to become better leaders and team leaders in this
Mhm.
case?
Um, Most of the teams I work with, because I've been doing this for a long time. So, I guess over my history is such that I'm working farther and farther up the food chain in terms of the teams I work with. So most of the
Yeah.
teams I work with now end up being pretty senior teams.
Yeah.
I don't work with people running, have individual contributors working for them anymore.
Yeah.
Um, uh, so most of the teams I work with, the people on the team oftentimes could have thousands of people working for them.
Yeah. Okay.
Just because they're head of operations or the head of sales or the head of, some of the other functions not going to have big groups working for them, but they may have, I got head of APAC, head of Europe, head of Latin America working for me.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, a big thing there, you talked about this earlier, Tom, a big thing there, there's two big discussions that's got to happen with these senior teams. One is, where does first team loyalty lie? Because most of these people are leading big organizations underneath them. They may be reporting to the CEO, but they also have functions that they're leading that are pretty important. And so does first team loyalty reside with the function or the operation that they run, or does it run with the CEO? Where is their attention focused? And if it has to do with the function, then guess what? They're going to be playing dysfunctional family feud because they're not going to get along well, and they're going to have a hard time getting along. Um,
Or there are going to be a bunch of functional leads that show up at the team meeting and just do report outs and whatnot. But that's their first team is at the functional level. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah, but that leads us to a second point, which is a really probably the most important point that I think for just about any collection of people. Should we operate as a group, as a team, or something in between?
Okay.
And what I mean by that is there's two kind of ways you can organize people. So one way you can organize people is as a group. In a group, basically, people in a group have individual goals. What they do doesn't really affect anybody else, and they get rewarded based upon their individual outcomes or efforts.
Makes sense. Yep.
Um, and most salespeople fall into that category. Talent acquisition falls into that category. That's as you can think about all kinds of sporting teams like golf teams or track teams or swimming teams all fall into that kind of category. Teams, on the other hand, would be like a hockey team, a basketball team, football team, a cross-functional team,
Hmm.
perhaps, where they all do something. They have common goals. They all what they do affects everybody else, and they win or lose together. And what you end up finding is there's not that many collections of people that are pure groups, and there are not many that are pure teams. Most fall somewhere in between.
That's a good point. Yeah, I would
And
agree.
and but what's really important with these groups that fall in between, I call them hybrids. what's really critical, and this is probably question number one with all the senior teams I work with. When is it better to operate as a group, and when is it better to operate as a team? So what I mean by that is there are going to be issues that crop up. Say you got a CEO and his or her staff. There are going to be issues that crop up, and they go, okay, is this an issue that we all need to weigh in on, or is this an issue where three of us should take it, or somebody should take it, and we all don't need to weigh in here? Most of these senior teams suffer from either the disease of inclusivity, alpha paralysis, or FOMO, where they all have to be involved with everything. And it ends up tremendously bogging down what ends up happening in team meetings. And you're talking about a group issue in a team meeting when half the people have checked out. It's the wrong topic for that venue. And so one of the things I end up working with a lot of senior teams is this distinction between groups, teams, and hybrids, and helping them identify here are the group issues where the rest of us don't get to be involved and we don't get to whine and bitch and
Yeah.
moan about not being involved with it. And here are the ones that are team issues that we all have to weigh in on and
Okay.
when to recognize it's one or the other. So when issues
Yeah.
crop up, we call it audible right away. Hey, this is a group issue. This is a Tom, Gordy, and Steve issue. You guys take care of it. The rest of us don't need to get involved. Because if that issue crops up, the whole team, believe me, because of alpha paralysis, the whole team will want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
shouldn't. It gets in the way.
Yeah. 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 And then having the ability as the leader of that team to be able to discern what is worthy of a true
Yes,
teamwork versus
exactly.
group work because of your point about FOMO and inclusivity and all that sort of thing that people want to be in on everything and that just weighs it all
Yeah,
down. Yeah.
yeah. I'm gonna have a call tomorrow with head of global talent management for a large manufacturing firm, and this firm has got the person in charge is a lawyer of the HR team, but they've got the HR organization, the legal organization underneath a chief administrative officer. She really wants to build a high performing team. But the reality is, the legal folks have got their own empire and
Sure.
organization, their own
Yeah.
issues they're dealing with. HR, very, very different. Spending, remember I talked earlier about is the juice worth the squeeze? It's just not worth the squeeze trying to get these two groups working together. It
Yeah.
doesn't make
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. No, that makes total sense. And I think having the wisdom and the knowledge and experience to be able to make that discernment of what are you really dealing with here? Because time and resources are limited. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you can just continue pushing this rock uphill, but it's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. And in the experience that I've had and the teams that we're working with, they want to collaborate, but they know the extent and the time investment that collaboration takes, and so there is some discernment, and that's where they tie it back up to what's the strategic imperatives here to be able to prioritize and say, yes, we do need to come together and have some rumble and discussion around these particular things that we've got to deal with because they are important to the enterprise, and that's typically what we've seen to help these leaders of teams be able to discern what is worthy of the collaboration and really getting people on board and to flush it out. And some of this other stuff just sort of put it at more as what you would call a group intervention or group work, to be able
Well,
to get.
that's exactly right, Tom. Because what ends up, but see, the problem, what ends up happening is what you're describing is exactly right. But then the problem is, well, because we got involved with this issue, we should all get involved with this issue too, which really does not lend itself to that collaboration discernment. But we should get in. We were involved with this one, so we should be in. And that's where it gets into problems.
Yeah.
Where if you don't have those rules set up where you can really explicit about it, says, hey guys, we really shouldn't all be involved with this one. It's
Yeah.
okay if we're not.
Yeah. 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 One of the things that sort of stuck out with me as I was reading through some of your early manuscript notes, you make this comment about in there on the 10 observations. So you've got these 10 observations. Um, and you made this point that most leaders are flying blind when it comes to team dynamics and performance. Are they just not seeing it, or some of the tension and the lack of ability to lean into kind of the conflict side and disagreement, they're just sort of not seeing it, not addressing it, or they just don't know how to address it? Because we have some teams where conflict is there, where you've got
Hmm.
people shutting
Oh yeah,
down or they're
yeah.
backing away, um, and there's tension there. But is it because they don't know how to address it and deal with it, or is it what is it that you see on that front, or we're just kind of blind to it?
Well, again, I think our research in surveying the 5,000 leaders, what we
Yeah.
found was that 60% felt that they were leading an above average or a high performing team. 60% of leaders felt that.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
12% of their team members felt the same way.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so there is this reality distortion field that goes on here where these leaders think they're actually a lot better at it than they are.
That's
So
what you're getting at with this observation. That right
yeah,
there
yeah,
is what you're getting at.
it's like
Yep. Yep.
like I said in the manuscript you read, Simon and Garfunkel said it best. People believe what they want to believe and disregard the rest, and I think
Yeah.
that's true with
Yeah.
team leaders.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think the other piece that ends up happening is direct reports are active participants in this reality distortion field that leaders have because
Yeah.
they end up spinning everything and the higher you go, the more the spin happens.
Yeah. Yeah. When you say spinning it, what do you mean? Meaning spinning it to almost like they're sort of competing. They bring their own
Hey,
drama to the
hey,
team. Is that what you're talking about?
hey, we've won the war 38 times against Iran already.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think they're telling Trump? So
Yeah.
people are spinning information. They're just, the higher you go, the more people massage, message, tweak what gets shared with the leader in order to put themselves into a positive light.
Yeah.
They're afraid the messenger's going to get shot.
Yeah. 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 And do you find that the feedback loops, we've certainly see this, so it's a little bit of a leading question, but see if you agree, but that the feedback loops relative to the constituents out there, their perception of the effectiveness of these teams versus the team's assessment of their effectiveness gets sort of more distorted, meaning it's almost like this echo chambers that tend to evolve with teams seeing themselves as more effective than in reality or based upon how others see them. Do you see that becoming more of a distortion or a gap the higher up in the organization you go?
I think you're bang on there. So one of the things that we did with the latest edition of the team assessment survey is in the past, earlier versions only had the team leader and team members provide ratings. And what we'd end up seeing with some teams, and this was oftentimes the case with HR teams,
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
right, HR teams would rate the results, which is one of the 8 components on the rocket model, their results in the 80 or the 90th percentile. We are knocking it out of the ballpark. And they rate their mission component, which is, do we have a clearly defined purpose? Do we have we defined winning? Have we set clear goals? And that would be like in the 15th or the 20th percentile.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
they're saying, we don't know why we're here. We don't know how to win. We don't have any kind of really clear goals, but by God, we're getting fantastic results.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and they're teams that just confuse productivity, activity with productivity.
Yeah.
And so one of the things we ended up doing was with this latest edition of the team assessment survey is we teams can get feedback from anywhere from 2 to 10 internal stakeholders or customers. And the idea behind that is to pop that bubble. If they're really good, people who are marketing, selling, depending upon that team's outputs, can tell you if you're knocking it out of the ballpark.
That is a critical element. So what I'm hearing is that for our listeners out there that have been either involved or considering doing some sort of a team assessment, whether it's through your organization, Gordy, or whatever team assessment, you've got to be able to get those stakeholders, that outer ring, to be able to give you some feedback, because you may be operating in a vacuum or an echo chamber
Yes.
that's not based upon really the reality of the situation. That's what I'm hearing. You've got to have both of those perspectives to be able to make some decisions on what to do to affect change within your team's
Yeah.
effectiveness.
too many teams leaders too. Too many teams believe their own BS.
Yeah. Yeah.
They think, oh man, I'm doing really, really good. You know, I just remember all kinds of athletic teams I've been on where we thought we were really good. I remember I was on a college hockey team. I played at Air Force. We were on a college hockey team. We had a really good team. We were like, at the time, I think we were like 20-5 or something like that. Playing all these D1 teams, really kicking ass. And then we played the U.S. Olympic team a couple of years before the Miracle on Ice. And we lost
Yeah.
14-4.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you just get a whole different you get a different perspective once you just start benchmarking against the real competition.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. And we saw that most recently in the FIFA as I mean, those guys are the best of the world. And we're starting to see how, you play sort of, when I was coaching soccer,
Yeah,
we all learned to play
yeah,
up, because otherwise you become you play to that level of your
yeah,
competitor. And so that's what
yeah.
you're getting at here. This is so fascinating. If you were to zero in on, because we're just about out of time here, Gordy, if you were to zero in on three things, what I've heard from our conversation here is one, that team leaders really need to do some sort of an assessment that is based upon some structural elements that have been correlated to driving team performance, meaning pick an assessment and try to get some data relative, like the diagnostic side of this. Get on the scale, to use your
Yeah,
metaphor, and how
yeah,
much weight do you need to lose, or what are some things that we need to do to
yeah.
be able to get some data? Is that would be sort of the first thing I'm hearing? Is that
I,
correct?
I would even I would even back up a step. So I think
Okay.
that's step number two. It's
Okay.
an important step. It's one of the three. It's a critically important step. But I think I would back up a step and say, what is your mental model for teamwork?
Okay.
What is your framework for building high performing teams? And what I would do there is look at the different models that are out there. There are different frameworks out there for building teams. Pick one that seems to make sense. It's practical, it aligns with your beliefs. We have a model. Patrick Lencioni's got a model. Katzenbach and Smith have. There's a bunch of people out there with different models. When you think about building high performing teams, which model, which framework makes sense to you? So,
Yeah.
so you can think about, okay, here's what I need to pay attention to if I want to build a team.
Okay.
Step two then is the assessment piece. Get
Okay.
some feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you were to identify, so being able to identify those gaps, then if you had to identify sort of a third thing that you would share with our listeners, what would be that third thing?
Um, what tools what are some practical tools you can adopt to address the shortcomings of your team? The teams are not going to be hitting on all cylinders. They're not going to be on the same page, say, about the situation, or they're going to be unclear about the team's purpose, or people have ill-defined roles. So
I see.
where can we go to get some tools? Say, okay, here's how you actually solve that problem working with the team.
Yeah. Yeah. So whatever methodology or framework, that's sort of the step one, and then the assessment piece. But you've got to be able to have some resources available to you as a team leader that you could implement. And if not, reach out to HR folks or team consultants, or do
Yeah,
your own reading. There's a ton of stuff. I'm just in
yeah,
such, my son is 30, my daughter's 26, and they learn how to do all kinds of stuff. And they're out on the internet and they're doing
yeah.
chat GPT and they're
Oh
putting
yeah,
stuff in there. How do I address this particular issue? So there are resources. So the fact that there are not available resources out there, that just doesn't play anymore. I mean, there are plenty of
yeah,
resources to be able to
yeah.
identify what those things are that you can do. So, uh,
Yeah. So I mean, it's a little bit, you almost can think about it, Tom, like we talked earlier in the conversation about losing weight. In one sense, you've got to, you got to get some feedback that you need to lose some weight, and you got to talk to your doctor, whatever, get on the
yeah,
scale.
yeah,
But then you've got to adopt a diet. You've got to adopt some sort of, here's the exercise piece, here's the diet piece, and then you've got to have a plan to stick to it.
yeah,
So the,
yeah,
the fourth component is having a plan. It's like here's it's one thing to think, yeah, I got to lose weight. It's another thing to say, okay, I'm going to start eating healthy. But it's a third, fourth thing is say, okay, yeah, but here's what the plan looks like. Here's what I should be in
Yeah.
month 1, month 2, month 3, month 4, whatever the case may be.
Yeah. Yeah. And to really focus in on the process side, knowing that it's going to take some time and effort, and to be able to sort of recognize hitting some of those process steps as wins, as
Yeah,
opposed to expecting the outcome to define the win. So it is really about defining the wins along the way, is what
yeah,
I'm hearing.
exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
This has been great, Gordy. So, so do you have a deadline of when your book's going to be out?
Oh, hell no. ah, you know, I don't know.
You just blew out the candles on your 70th birthday,
I know.
recently. So I think you better kick it into gear.
I think I have a leadership textbook, and it's on the 11th edition now. I think the 12th edition, we're supposed to get started on that by I think the winter of the end of next year, end of
Uh-huh. Yeah.
2027.
Yeah.
So I got to have this one done before that. So
Okay.
I would guess the next 6 months, something like that.
Okay.
Um, you know, we'll see. You actually prompted me to get going on this thing, so I thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Once I get going on stuff, I usually am like, okay, the machine started, and I'll be hitting it pretty much every day now. But it'll take a while,
Yeah.
you know.
Awesome. This has
So,
been great.
but
When I think of Gordy, your name, I think of teams, and you are an expert in this field with a lot of experience. And so I really appreciate you sharing some of your insights and kind of looping all of us in on what you've been working on and where you see some things going and how we all as team leaders can become better at what we're trying to do. So it's been a pleasure, Gordy. You have a good
thanks
rest
for
of the week.
having me again, Tom.
Yeah.
Yeah, appreciate it.
One big takeaway that I had with my conversation with Gordy was this, that he was talking about how all teams don't have to be a high performing team. In fact, in some cases, given the mission or what the team's trying to accomplish, a group might be a more effective way. And yet everybody thinks that they need to have a high performing team. He reminded us that having a high performing team takes a lot of energy, time, resources to be able to invest to get to that performance level. He also talked about the difference between a team and a group and this hybrid, which he's seeing more in organizations showing up today as team proliferation just keeps growing. Because teams are how we get things done, but maybe a hybrid might be a better way to approach it. What do we mean by a hybrid? We mean that in some situations, given the problem or the issue that needs to be addressed or where they're going, perhaps maybe a group of 2 or 3 people within a team might be a better way to accomplish that particular issue or address the problem or make a recommendation. And that not everybody needs to come together and collaborate. Some tools and practices that will take our teams up to that next level. And so here's something to think about as you're driving home today. Is the team that you're leaving truly a team, or maybe you're a group, or maybe you're a hybrid? And where should you be given your mission and what you're trying to accomplish? Or perhaps discern and evaluate, are there some things on our agenda right now that would be better served by a group of 2 or 3 people to say, go tackle this problem and then come back with a recommendation. And we're all going to get aligned around that. Even though it may not be what we truly believe, it's better served in a group. We have to be a little bit more discerning. Another question that I would ask is, does our team have a common framework, a common model around what are the things that need to be in place, and how can we all rally around some common building blocks that will help take us to that next level? And don't underestimate the importance of energy and alignment. I was with a senior leader yesterday, and he was talking about how in the last year he has really focused on team alignment and clarity of mission of where they're trying to get to, and including people's sort of as part of that direction, that mission. And he talked about how what's transpired and come about is this team energy that he has just seen the energy levels increase. And with that, the performance levels have also increased. And so, needless to say, he is a big proponent in investing in teams. And so that wraps it for today. For today's conversations, we've included a few takeaways in the show notes, and we've included how you can get a hold of Gordy as well. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, follow us on your favorite platform or leave us a rating or a review because it really does help others find the show. I'll end with this thought. Leadership isn't easy, and yet it's so important. And our people do need strong leaders. And it can also, to you, be rewarding and truly fulfilling. And so my challenge to you is to go out and lead with that courage. Lead with authenticity and integrity and curiosity, because curiosity is the leadership skill that will keep us growing and learning as we go forward. Till next time, thanks for listening.